Good morning. Well, welcome to the Pre-Snack Finance Show with Simon and Khader. We're going to talk about operating leasing. And they're going to tell you how you can get an aircraft for $100 a day.
I wish.
So this morning, you heard from the bank financiers. And I think a good place to start is, what do you do and how are you different?
Would you like to start, John?
Sure. Good. So we finance planes. Our strength is operating leases, but we also do loans and finance leases to support the financing of acquisitions by clients. We are a global footprint, and there are certain countries we can't do because we're American, and sanctions create restrictions on what we're able to do because of that. But we've got about 120 aircraft that we finance currently. About 75 to 80 of those are under operating lease, and the rest are under loans and finance leases.
Yeah, we do it differently than Global Jet, slightly different. We mainly focus on lease to buy, which is a concept that we've developed for the past few years, whereby you focus on the asset more than the client only financials. Of course, it helps with the strong financials, but we focus on the asset. And basically, your upfront investment is not huge with us. And we would, with our experience on assets, especially, of course, private jets, we would try to work with the owners to get them the best asset in the market, so that can help them and help us to maintain a good financial equation.
Now, with the banks, I mean, they've got an institutional relationship spanning various business lines with their customers, and I think that should help the credit analysis and give the banks some leeway with deal issues that arise, but may also constrain them with respect to client selection. You are standalone financiers, I believe. You don't have any other business lines. So how does that impact your client selection and the way that you look at deals based on your understanding of how the banks do it? What major differences would you like to highlight?
We still use the same kind of criteria where a KYC has to be done on the client and his financials, on the asset itself as well, before we actually try to propose any financial solution. The difference between us and the bank, of course, the bank main business is to have the money. Okay, we look at not just the money, but we look at the asset. Because for us, on a 3 years period or 4 years, if the client decide not to take the plane, we still have to sell that plane or release it again. So we focus on asset probably more than the banks. The banks would look at your financials, they would look at what you're saving with them, what you have in your account, before they finance you. I guess Global Jet probably similar to us on that front.
Yes, I think that our underlying philosophy is almost identical to Khader's philosophy. And the point that I'd stress is that both of us, we're driven by the desire to be a financier of an aircraft. We're not looking to buy tied services, so we're never going to be looking to get you to finance an aircraft with us to bring in a wealth management aspect. We're not looking to do a treasury management. We're not looking to finance your real estate. And additionally, the collateral position that we typically are taking is just the aircraft. We're not looking for you to pledge other parts of the business in support of what we're doing. So we have a sole focus, we have a sole role, and we're able to do things that banks can't do, because one of the big differences as a non-bank is the wonderful Basel IV that was talked about is something that doesn't apply to us. We're not inside the banking regulations, so I don't have this same constraint of, oh, well, doing an aircraft's an unsecured lending. We look at it as a very secured lending, and we're very happy with that asset, and that gives me greater possibilities than the banks will allow me.
So if you don't have an institutional relationship and various levers you can pull if the deal starts to become a little distressed, what do you rely on as things start to turn south?
Well, from our perspective, we look at two big things going into the transaction. The first one is the reputation of the client. Credit's obviously a very important factor in making sure that they're unlikely to default. But we also want to make sure we're dealing with people who have this very reputable outlook in their business transactions, that they have an ability to unwind unfortunate situations in a very collegial manner and are not adversarial in what they do. And then secondly, we look to work with operators who can help us out by repositioning the aircraft when things are going wrong. And I'd say the last thing that we do to do that is, unlike the banks, we typically take a security deposit that we hold for the duration of the financing. And when somebody's got money that they can get back, they work with you much better. They want to make sure they can get as much of that security deposit returned to them. And so you find that the problems that might otherwise exist tend to go away a little bit. You don't get the keys thrown at you with the good luck message. They're like, no, here are the records. I will bring the plane to this location. When can I get my money back? And that's really what we've relied upon.
Yeah, most of the things that Simon said, it's correct. But before we start even the conversation with the client, in terms of how we're going to finance them, we do the KYC and the customer, not only as a reference, but also his financials, where he is, and do we have a relationship with the client. We also look at the asset itself, is it the right one that he's buying? In our group, we have another division that does the sales and acquisition as well. So we can look at some of the stocks that we have or that we can help the client to buy. So the way we formulate at the end the actual deal is not just the actual money, but also the assets. The asset is very important for us, and I'm sure for Global Jet as well. So we need to really look at the asset deep before we can actually finance it. Plus the KYC and the customer should give us enough information and enough backing to back it up. The other thing is if there's a default, let's say by the end of first year or second year, when we look at the deposit, when we look at the payment of the lease, we should be able to have sufficient fund to support the asset until we sell it or release it again.
And what about getting the asset back if all else fails?
Very good question, Eric. It depends on the region, to be honest. I mean, in the Middle East, we're still having some issues which really is our responsibility, possibly Simon here, to try to educate the authorities and probably some of the government departments on how to deal with these things and the legal aspect of it. Cape Town Convention is not really very well kind of looked into here. Europe is much easier. Of course, America is much easier to actually repossess an asset. Here it's quite difficult. But you need to rely also, especially in the Middle East, in the relationship that you have with the client. How can you possibly restructure the deal if there is any difficulties that facing the client? Is there any possible way to, extend the loan or extend the lease? Is there any possible way to try to see if you can take it back from him and lease it to another client and so on? So relationship plays a big part here,
And you, Simon?
I don't think I can say much different to that. It's one of the reasons we really focus on the operator, because if something does go wrong, the client, especially in the Middle East, tends to be a little hesitant about a public default and the image that they'd be going through because of the default. And we've had a couple of experiences in the past where people would play games with you. An example of how skillful the game was, we had this one particular client that would file a flight plan to go from the Middle East to London, and we'd go to meet him at the London airport where the flight plan was, and 30 minutes out of Nice, he'd refile his flight plan to London, Nice, and then we'd scramble to get to Nice airport to go meet the plane, and the plane had taken off and gone somewhere else. So if you've got an operator that isn't working with you, it makes it a lot harder to repossess. So while we naturally want a very strong relationship with our clients, building that relationship with the operator has also been critical from our perspective, because if 2 out of the 3 are working towards a common goal, you can usually drag the third person to the end result that you want as well.
One of the things I would probably add to this is that we do obviously own the asset while we're actually leasing the asset. So with the management companies, which is in the Middle East now, you have a lot of Western management companies and MROs that really reliable, that we had tri-party agreement where we control also the asset from that point of view. Still, you're going to face some difficulties with the legal system, obviously. But if you have the operators on your side, it makes it a little bit easier in the sense that you have an agreement with them. And if you want to ground the plane, you would have just to request it, and you hope that it will be able to be grounded in a place where you can actually possess the plane.
And so you said that Cape Town, it's challenging because its effectiveness is dependent upon the underlying performance of the government.
Yeah, it's true.
And okay. Yeah, I mean, I attended ISTAT EMEA, and one of the Lease Coast CEOs said, you know, if you're hanging your hat on Cape Town, you've got the wrong hat.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Oh, for me, one of the problems, Eric, with Cape Town is there's inconsistent standards as to what's understood by Cape Town, because there are various levels of implementation that can be done, and everybody claims that they're Cape Town. And the US is full Cape Town, which means as a operating lessor, I've got self-help remedies available to me. I know that the courts cannot go back to domestic legislation to overrule what Cape Town's put in place. But then you can go to other countries. We talked about it yesterday with Saudi Arabia, where they are Cape Town compliant, but they haven't enacted everything under Cape Town, and you still need to go to court to get your judgment. So when people say we're Cape Town, like Khader's suggesting, it's not this panacea for our problems. It's really, it's a box we can check, which makes us feel a little bit better, but we can't rely upon it as the solution for getting a plane back.
And does Cape Town, the effectiveness, have any impact on your pricing?
I mean, it depends, as I said, the client, the asset, the region that you're working with, and that affects the pricing, of course. I mean, the more risk you're taking, obviously you're going to charge more, you know, to mitigate that risk in the future. Having said that, you know, in the Middle East, I found that because of the stigma that they have here, that loans and having problems, it's the last thing that they would like to have, is particularly when you're having a plane. Probably he will get rid of his wife, kids, but not the plane. You know, that's the last thing that we would get rid of. Unlike America, unlike the West, you know, a bankruptcy, it's not a big issue. You know, it's just file it and that's it. But here, to have a loan, to have a promise that you need to do something, it's very, very crucial for them to maintain their promise.
Now, I haven't done any Islamic finance in a long time, but what I recall of it is that interest is like kind of a no-no. So how do Islamic concepts of the time value of money impact what you're offering, Khader? And is there a substantive difference between what you're doing and what Simon's doing? Or is it just a different way of getting to the same place?
It's almost the same road, okay, different vehicle. I mean, the Islamic finance, as you probably know, it's an ajari concept, means that you're renting the plane, basically. You set everything up front, the rent, the plane, the value, what you have to pay at the end of it. So it's all being fixed right from the beginning. In our case, yeah, we do a similar thing, okay, but it depends on sometimes how do you value the plane after a few years, or maybe in the second year or the third year if they want to come out of the agreement. But in Islamic financing, it's all set in the beginning. It started growing in the Middle East. I think a lot of banks are offering it now, especially for obviously some of the families here, wealthy families and family offices. We don't find it as a competition. We still have enough to actually gain some access to some of our clients. The beauty about our model as well, probably Simon will agree with me now, that there is a growth on this region, on the leasing concept, because obviously with corporate tax coming into equation, so that would help him to offset some of these taxes. I am hoping that will work because Dubai has just implemented tax, Saudi Arabia has implemented tax, Bahrain already there, and Qatar should be soon. So that would probably encourage them to go more towards leasing.
I think one of the changes that I've seen, I've been coming to the Middle East for 20 plus years. When I first started coming, there was very much an attitude in this region of my plane, I'll borrow some money to top up what I don't want to spend in cash, but if I can't pay cash, I can't afford the plane, I wouldn't buy it. And that was sort of grandfather's attitude. The modern generation that are taking over the family businesses have all been, for the most part, Western educated. A lot of them are coming out of US MBA programs. And this concept of interest, while not exactly Islamic, is less of an issue to them in their financing. I run across a request for Islamic financing maybe 1 in 50 deals. Most of the deals we'll look at now, especially on operating leases, are acceptable to most of the companies in the Middle East. It's not the way it used to be. And the concept of leverage being totally understood now makes it a lot easier to find people that want to finance a jet. I think the operating lease is resonating quite well, not just because of the incoming taxation schemes, but also the idea that ease of disposal at the end, whether you can,
Sure.
if you're a new buyer and you want to get a new plane every 5 years, the idea that you can lease it from one of the two of us here, and then at the end of the 5 years, give the plane back and take your new one and just start the cycle over again, has proven to be very, very attractive to people because it eliminates headaches. They don't have to worry about market volatility. And that's been really a USP for what we do.
Now, you may have noticed that it's kind of hot outside and there's not a lot of green. Let's talk about how environmental considerations may or may not impact how you underwrite a deal. Because you may know that in Europe, the European Union is requiring banks to push an environmental agenda. Do you have the same issues?
Not to the extent that European has, but if we do have an issue, I think they look at the leasing as an option to not to cover up, but to kind of hide that I'm not using the plane, it's not mine, I'm just leasing it for special usage, especially with companies that they are being in the public, that they would like not to see it off the balance sheet, not to see the plane there, so they go more to the leasing. Environmentally speaking, I think it's coming around, but most of the governments here, they're really spending a lot of money on other ways, greening cities and push towards the green environment. We're hoping that the manufacturer also look at the fuels and the uses of the new fuels and the new engines. That maybe help us as well.
As we all know, with Donald Trump's dig, baby, dig policy, environmental concerns in North America have really faded to the background. We were never really driven by any of the ESG concerns that were out there. I mean, we certainly encourage our clients to try and be conscientious of their footprints, but it's not a constraint. We don't require an ESG statement for us to underwrite a transaction. We're quite happy to do an oil company, which is probably one of the bigger polluters, but the environment does impact our underwriting. It's more impacting it not through ESG concerns, but more just the actual impact on the aircraft itself. An aircraft sitting on the ramp in a sandstorm is going to get its paint stripped very, very quickly, as opposed to one that's been hiding in a hangar. The heat will crack the cockpit displays and so on if it's not closed up properly. And that'll all impact the residual value going forward. So that where that really hurts you is that because we have to amortize a greater amount of the capital over the same lease term, you're going to have slightly higher rents for you. So if you're in the Middle East and you want to get a better deal, get a hangar, get it put out of the sun, get it out of the sandstorm, you'll get a better lease rate than an aircraft that's just going to sit on the ramp. And anybody that went to Riyadh or Jeddah right after the collapse of the Saudi market when the Crown Prince invited everybody to the Ritz, you saw lots of aircraft sitting on the ramp that were just crying out for some TLC, and those aircraft lost incredible value just because they weren't being protected.
Well, I've asked you both a lot of questions, and you've indulged me. Does anyone in the audience have any questions they would like to ask? And I guess maybe Al can, oh, there we go. Do you ask for residual value guarantees for third parties?
No.
So you take full asset risk.
We're an operating lessor. We're a specialist in evaluating where we think the resale value of a plane is like to be 5 to 10 years in the future. It's our underlying reason we're in business, and it makes no sense for us as an operator to go out and then say, well, we're the specialist, but we'll pay somebody else to do our job. It's just going to add cost to my financing that I'm already paying people internally to evaluate for me. So for us, no, I don't require third-party residual value guarantees.
We don't. Actually, we do our own evaluation in-house. But if there is a kind of an argument between us and of course, the client, then we have to look at the third party to come in to see the actual value if we are right or not.
Would you, just taking it one step further, would either of you offer a residual value guarantee to another financier if they ask for it?
We can offer them evaluation for airplanes, yes, of course. I mean, they can always come to us and we can do a full evaluation for any asset they're requiring that. Yeah, we can do that service.
We've decided not to. We did look at it quite closely for a number of years, and it was a consideration, but there is an awful lot of downside risk in actually doing that because you can't predict where the volatility is likely to be. Providing just a pure RVG, if you were going to set one, you probably want one that's significantly lower than the actual projected resale value. I mean, no insurance policy is set up to give you an upside in it, and we felt that if we're going to be lowering the residual position that we want to underwrite, that would make the deals less competitive, and then you add on the fee that we'd want to charge for providing it, makes it even further hindered. So we decided that we'd rather work on trying to get people to do the financing with us than getting into a product that had an awful lot of exposure for us.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, how do you protect the operator financially when the client defaults? You know, so basically, do you backstop operators?
Sorry, what was the question? How?
Yeah, how do you protect the operator financially when the client defaults?
Well, the operator has got an agreement with the client, and I hope that they have really worked it out to have, upfront deposits and enough money in the kitty to actually support an asset. And because the tripartite agreement, we are not responsible for the operating costs as much as we're responsible that we own the asset and we have the right to ground the plane if there is any disagreement with the owner. So really, we don't get involved in that, as to speak.
I echo everything that Khader's just said about the only way that I'd say we implicitly support an operator is if the operator is actually being forthright with us and telling us ahead of time that they are seeing payment delays from their principal.
Yes,
We've got a big stick as the owner of the aircraft to say, make sure you're paying your bills, stay current, I want this aircraft well maintained, or I'll take the plane away. I can help them in that manner, but if they just stay silent and rack up millions of dollars of unpaid operating costs and then there is a default, there's nothing I can do about it. They have the relationship with the client for flying the plane. You can't look to me as the deep pockets to be your backstop for what you didn't do well.
I mean, I do hope that the operator will tell us if there's any difficulties with the client, prior to get a bigger problem. And this will even, of course, enhance our position to say, okay, stop here. What are we going to do now? And maybe even ground the plane. So yeah, it's a tripartite agreement, the three of us in it, and we have to really protect each other.
Okay. So there's a question, Khader, where can you tell us more about the lease to purchase? Is it less capital intensive, specifically with regards to security deposits and upfront outlays? Yeah,
it is indeed that we don't require a lot upfront down payments. We look at probably 6 months of deposits, lease payments, plus, of course, the first quarter, so that brings it to about 9 months of that. Setup fees and so on, and these are kind of secondary fees that we ask for. So we are different than the banks, probably small, different than Global Jet, and that as you require some of upfront payments, but we don't do that, no.
Is there anything there, Simon, that is responsive to your business model?
So we offer a slight variant on what Khader's offering. So we will structure an operating lease with a purchase option towards the end of the lease, so that if somebody is trying to make up their mind whether they want to get out of the aircraft or want to keep it, we'll give them that flexibility sort of 2 years before the end of the agreed lease term. And we'll actually offer to finance the purchase if we get to that point. But it's not a preset. We rarely will do a 100% financing with a security deposit on a rent-to-own structure. We're a little bit more conservative. We're probably 90 or 95% advance rate on those structures.
Okay. Continuing with what you can and cannot do, Graham has asked, would you consider short-term interim leases to cover delays to new deliveries?
Would we consider?
So for my answer is no. The amount of work that goes into creating a lease is significant.
Yes.
We do not charge clients for the internal costs of setting it up. We have to charge for the legal fees that third parties are charging us to do it. But if we were to do a short-term lease, the lease would become outrageous in terms of building up sufficient gap between the projected resale. If I'm doing 6 months and the asset's supposed to drop 5%, I don't want to take just 5%. I need a buffer, so all of a sudden I'm doing a 6-month lease where I'm looking for 12, 15% of the asset value to be repaid. So could it be done? Yes. Would it be economically sensible for anybody? No. The better solution is to agree to enter into a longer-term deal where we allow the aircraft to be placed on these short-term interim leases through a single source. That would make much more sense to us.
Yeah, I would have to agree with Simon here, because the cost setting up things like that it's just a lot, and the time taken to do something for 6 months. But what we do normally, if we're financing or leasing aircraft, a new position, let's say, we try to work with some of the operators to see if they have something that to offer our client. But really to do it ourselves for 6 and 3 months, no, it's very hard to do that.
Okay. So any other questions? This is a legal question. The deregistration in the UAE can be made by way of a court order only with the GCAA instead of a court judgment. Do you agree?
Simon, I'm going to leave you that for this. Not right at the moment.
Yeah. So the UAE is sort of an interesting anathema to me, because within the UAE itself, there are 4 different legal regimes that we can apply. So you could take the general law of the UAE, but you've also got an enclave in Abu Dhabi that recognizes English law, and you could go and file your rights under English law. You've got DIFC that has a hybrid version of the two. So the statement is relatively accurate, but it really depends under which regime you have agreed to set up your financing. So I can't say yes or no. I have to be a typical lawyer.
I have the answer. Cape Town.
I think
You're offering to take me to Cape Town.
I think we sum it up that it's still fragmented, the system, and I'm sure soon it will be developed. But I go back again to the relationship. That if you have a good relationship with your client and his family, then you can actually try to solve the problem without going to that. If you look at I'm not sure what your experience, Simon, but in the region, how many defaults has happened? It's not that many at all compared to, let's say, Europe and America. It's hardly any. So that gives you confidence on doing business in the region.
Okay. Are there any, I suppose outside of sanctions, are there countries where you don't do finance or leasing?
Yes.
To be honest, yes.
I mean, so you've excluded the sanctioned countries, which is the easy ones to go, but one of the criteria we've got to be very comfortable with is the legal jurisdiction under which we're going to be financing. If you've got a highly corrupt regime, you're not going to want to finance there, because even though the law might be on your side, If the president of the particular country instructs the courts to find in a particular manner against you, the fact that you have a lawyer who told you that the law says you can get your plane back, the reality is you can't, and we won't go there. I don't want to name specific countries, because that's not
That's
always
no
the
fun,
result.
Simon. You should name
All
it.
right, so we won't do Congo. So typically, Central African countries pose an enormous headache for us. And we will look at other countries in Africa. It's not a no-go continent for us, but sort of Central African countries with more of the dictator regime, Equatorial Guinea, that kind of jurisdiction, those are the ones that pose headaches for us. And what tends to occur is not so much, we don't have a particular country ban, it often comes down to the relationship that the potential client has with the ruling families in that particular country. Do they have the ability to sway the judges against us because they're the in-law of the president?
Okay. Khader, it looks like we've got 1 minute. So,
Well, it's the same thing. I mean, there's some countries it's very hard to actually trying to put up with the legal system there and the procedures and what have you. However, you need to look also at the registration of the airplane and the customer himself. So if the jurisdiction of the registration is less risk, that could probably be a valuable deal to do. Plus the fact if you have that relationship with the client, then you should be able to do the deal. But there's some countries it's very hard to consider.
well, gentlemen, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you.
Class, you're dismissed for your snack.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks.